obviously, notions of karma tie into notions of an afterlife. And I just want to say, because this is a What is Buddhism class, and we have to say this, that this question of an afterlife is for some people, a very big question. If you associate Buddhism with reincarnation in your mind, that's not a crazy thing to do, because a lot of Buddhists historically believe in reincarnation. Buddhism came out of Hinduism, much in the same way that Christianity came out of Judaism. And there are a lot of threads. Some threads exist in the sense of responses, in that Buddhism was kind of responding to Hinduism and saying, we're not going to do that anymore, we're going to do this. But some threads are fairly consistent. And culturally what we can see is that for much of Buddhism, reincarnation just kind of stayed inside that package, even though there's a very solid argument from within Buddhism to say that it shouldn't be so simple as that. No self, for example, would be, as a doctrinal basis, a very solid ground to stand on if you wanted to say, wait a minute, reincarnation doesn't really make sense.
Would it make sense in that your dharma is what, like, you have no control over what dharma is, so then, like, your reincarnation would technically just be your dharma going off into wherever it goes, for whatever reason.
As long as it's not yours. Right.
Yeah, but no, when you pass on. Like, reincarnation would be passing on
Right.
to the next thing. You have no control over where you're going, but your dharma is just going to do what it wants to.
Well, and on the level of kind of the scientific level, in which we can say that all of us have atoms that were once shared by Shakespeare and a Tyrannosaurus Rex, on that level, that part's easy. Right? But if we take it to a more literal level, to imagine that there's a me, and that this me is moving from one life into the next life, it becomes a much more complicated conversation. I think without spending a lot of time on that, we have to just kind of acknowledge, while that is an important part of some strains of Buddhism, it's not an automatic. It's a fairly complicated issue. For myself, it just never made much sense, personally. And if I'm wrong, I'll find out. I'm going to stop for a minute and ask, are there any questions about karma? Yes?
I'm not sure this is about karma specifically, but you mentioned earlier that in the sense that there is no self, that there's a certain freedom related to that, but then you mentioned that, for instance, if you look at your parents and they're sort of stuck in particular ruts, you spoke about then, the good news is that they can evolve. So my question is, what evolves?
Well, I use the word evolve very freely. Probably the word I should use is change. They don't have to evolve. Right. I certainly have experiences with people who have grown older and taken steps that I would consider to be almost backward steps toward a narrower life. And then others who, just through the process of aging, have expanded in their understanding and their treatment of others tremendously. It can go either way. And then specifically, of course, at any moment in our lives, we can look up and realize that we have a passion that either we didn't know about or that we managed to keep hidden even from ourselves for 10 years or 20 years or 60 years. And I think we have to be able to allow for that without, I use the example of parents because I think it's not that our parents are stuck necessarily, but I think that as children of our parents, we imagine that they are frozen in time sometimes, that they're incapable of growth or change, because in some ways our own identity and our own solid understanding of the world kind of depends on mom and dad always being mom and dad, right? If that gets taken away, if they take up a radically different lifestyle, then who am I? And what is my story? What happened? We have to be able to make space for people to change without being condescending about it in the way that we can be. I'm thinking about this in relationship to our parents, but this goes for anyone, any relationship. We hold people in a particular way, insisting that they not change direction, as if our axle is connected to their, we have an axle connecting our wheel to theirs, and our ruts have to run parallel. It's very jarring if one person tries to turn. It can break the whole thing down. The freedom for me is in being open to that moment. And as I'm saying this, I guess I'll just articulate. One of the stories that comes to mind is of a friend who's my age, and who realized maybe, or who found out maybe 5 years ago, that his father was gay. And that was a couple of years after his father allowed himself to come to the realization that he was gay. And how much openness it requires to face something like that. That, again, that pulls the rug out of your sense of your story, and to just let it happen and say, okay, well, this is reality now. It's very hard. Yes?
Just wanted to sort of say, maybe as the way that I perceive what you were saying, just in response to your question, maybe, or the way that I see it maybe is that, yes, like maybe you have a dharma that you would consider to be the you dharma, but then at the same time it might be a little bit easier to sort of think of yourself as just a collection of an infinite number of dharmas, and what changes is the composition. You let things go and you take things on, and you let things go and you take things on as you move through life. So it might not necessarily be so much that your self singularly changes, but that you as a collection of all of these different things changes as it goes through time. That sort of makes a little more sense to me anyways.
I was more thinking about, or asking about evolution.
Okay.
You know, there's something, change is one thing, but evolution seems to have a different quality, a different sense to it, that if there's some kind of a progression into more, let's say, awareness or consciousness, that, you know.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think, yeah, I think I use evolve a little bit loosely, or well, but yeah, evolve seems so positive. Right?
I thought that was the good news.
Right. It's one of the options. Right. Yes.
How do we come to have a sense of self? I mean, the way you express that, there is no sense, there is no self, right? Which in a way is a negative statement. I mean, so how do you understand that we came to have a sense of self, that then you need to tell us that there is no self?